Hi, friends. What if the real threat to our health isn't just our busy schedule, the high stress, the lack of sleep, or fluctuating hormones, but actually the everyday foods and personal care products that we've been taught to trust? Today's guest is here to really open our eyes and quite possibly change our lives. Milli Hill is a writer, journalist, and unapologetic truth teller when it comes to women's health. You might know her from her best selling book, The Positive Birth Book, or Give Birth Like a Feminist, and her upcoming book, Ultra Processed Women is a real eye opening look at how the food and wellness industries have been undermining women's health, physically, emotionally, and hormonally. And this goes beyond food. We're talking about what's really in our moisturizer, our toothpaste, our period products, and how greenwashing is keeping many of us misinformed and overexposed to endocrine disruptors and harmful chemicals. In this conversation, you'll learn how ultra processed foods and everyday products silently impact our hormones, cycles, and energy, and why the female health industry's wellness promises often do more harm than good, and how to spot greenwashing. We also talk about what you can do right now to protect your health, reclaim your power, and become a more conscious, confident consumer. This episode really is a wake up call. And if you care about your health, you definitely want to be listening to this. So listen up, take some notes, and then also send it to the women in your life who could also benefit from hearing this information. Now let's dive in. Millie, it is great to welcome you to the podcast today. I'm really looking forward to this interview and just all the incredible work that you're doing to help women. Firstly, welcome. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting what you've been writing about recently. I mean, you've published many books, but when we look at your latest book, Ultra Processed Women, what prompted you to look at ultra processed foods and also beauty and things like that in the context of women in particular?
Well, I think it was just quite a long time thinking about women's health generally and the way that women's health tends to be sidelined and overlooked. And it was my own personal journey as well, a little bit, because I was going through perimenopause and menopause a couple of years ago. And I was I was writing another book actually and researching menopause. And I was looking at, menopause in other cultures. And it was then that I realized that menopause is not universal. I mean, maybe to some people that might sound obvious, but to me, it was quite a surprise that, in some cultures, they don't even have a word for menopause. So I was thinking, that's interesting. And obviously, that sort of started to get me thinking about diet and how that might be playing a role. And then, just as I was having those thoughts and experimenting with my own diet in menopause, um, I read Chris Van Tulleken book, as many people did, Ultra Processed People, and I heard lots of podcasts and radio programs about ultra processed food. And I guess I just joined the dots and I thought, this is so fascinating in terms of women's health, because women tend so often to be medicalized for their femaleness and for their female conditions. And I just thought, wow, what if it's what if food is the answer? I mean, that might sound a bit generalizing. I mean, obviously not in every case, but what if it's a key thing that we're not looking at?
Very much so. I mean, I picked up, I think, when I was looking at the sort of towards the beginning of your book, and you mention a stat that I think is something, if I'm remembering it correctly, that just kind of optimizing your nutrition, so removing ultra processed foods, could reduce symptoms in peri and early postmenopause by 34%, I think, which is huge. And it's definitely not the message that we're getting. I don't know about you, but I feel like there's incredible work that's being done at the moment to highlight the importance potentially for many women of hormone replacement therapy, but there's kind of this big drive towards that, but not enough said about the nutrition, the lifestyle, the stress management, all of these factors.
Yes, and interestingly, in that study, it was women who were taking HRT and women who weren't taking HRT who both noticed a reduction in symptoms. So it's not about saying HRT is bad or good, or you should have a better diet instead, or shaming anybody for their choices. It's just a fact that whatever you choose in terms of HRT, looking at your diet and what you're eating will have an impact. So you could say will make your HRT more effective, if you like.
So that reduction was the same in women who were taking
Yeah.
hormones and women who were not. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I'm actually doing a hormone reset next month in July, 21 days, to help women really address their nutrition, their fitness, their sleep, all of those things, their stress management, because I can see how much of a difference it makes. And it makes to me as a woman in perimenopause. We're juggling all these balls. And as you say, regardless of whether you decide to take HRT or whether it's right for you, it's a decision to be taken with your doctor. There are so many benefits regardless. Can
That's
we distinguish, right? Because I think this is a really important point, and you talk about the different categories of foods,
right.
is there is a distinction between a processed food and an ultra processed food. I think that's an important point.
Yeah, and that's a really common confusion. Even it seems among some experts sometimes. I guess it's just a word thing. People use the word processed when they mean ultra processed, and that perpetuates the confusion. But basically, humans have been processing food for millennia. I mean, when you grind up some nuts, or you cook a piece of meat, or you chop a cucumber, you're processing it. You're putting, or you pickle something, or you know, make it into jam or whatever. You're processing food. So lots of the food that we eat is processed, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with processed food. Ultra processed food is something completely different. It's food that's made in a factory for profit, that contains a lot of additives, that's a long way from the original ingredients that you might recognize as food, and that contains a whole host of other things that you wouldn't recognize as food. So ultra processed food, completely different to processed food.
Hmm. And hyper palatable in nature, right? I remember interviewing a neuroscientist actually in the very early days of the podcast who was originally working with Oreo, the cookie company in the United States. And he had to leave because it just didn't align in any way with his values, because his job was simply to watch as they were developing different formulations, was to observe children and see the different kind of recipes, concoctions they put together, and basically assess which formulation was the most addictive in order for it to go on the shelves. And that, that's scary that that's actually going on.
Well, people do draw comparisons between the tobacco industry of old, and of the present day to a certain extent, and the ultra processed food industry now. And in fact, there are actual real parallels. There are ultra processed food companies who came from tobacco companies, or were associated with them in the past. And so I think there's a lot of parallels between the way that ultra processed food companies operate, the way they market food to us, the way they tell us that, oh, it's just a matter of personal choice, for example. That's a classic one. We were told that with smoking, weren't we? Well, you can't tell people they're not allowed to smoke in the pub, because smoking is just about freedom of choice. And you hear the same arguments being made around ultra processed food. Just let people have all the options and let them decide. But what we know about choice is that it's not really that simple. And if a food is, as you say, hyper palatable and addictive, and it's heavily marketed, and it's marketed to us from childhood, and it's normalized, and all of these things, then we are going to make that choice, in inverted commas, more readily than we're going to choose an apple. I mean, I say in the book how my kids come in the kitchen saying, I'm hungry. I say, there's the fruit bowls over there, have an apple. But they're not hungry for an apple. Something in them wants a packet of crisps, a cake bar, or something ultra processed. It's more exciting. It delivers a better hit. Apples are just so hard to eat, and they take such a long time, and they just don't have that same kind of buzz, and the adults are doing it too, so we can't just blame the kids.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's an example you give in the book as well, because I always say this actually. And so it was interesting to see the research example you give, because I'm always making the point that, in nature, we never see Mother Nature really give us high fat with high carb. Probably coconut's about the closest we can get to it, right? That is sweet and fatty. And you show that illustration in the book of looking at the calories that come. I just loved this. The calories that come from an apple, which I think were about 55 calories per 100 grams or something. And the ratio of carbs to fats, they were like 1.5 calories or something from fat, if I'm remembering this correctly. And then you showed that was like what was the ratio? It was like a 36-1 ratio or something of carbs to fats. And then you gave the example of salmon, which had 0 coming from carbs and about 70 something calories coming from fat. I might have these the other way around, and you showed the ratio of that. And then you looked at chocolate, which per 100 grams had like over 200 calories from carbs, over 200 calories from fat, and this 1-to-1 ratio. And you realize, right, it's so easy to just gain weight when you're eating ultra processed foods.
Yeah, I mean, that magic ratio is not found in nature. There really isn't anything in nature that has that magic 1-to-1 carbs to fat ratio, and yet it's in many ultra processed foods, which tells you something right there, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. It
And
does.
they're also softer. The texture is a really interesting thing as well, and this idea of the food matrix. Like an apple, as we know, is quite hard and crunchy, and it has a different matrix, and that actually delivers a different experience, if you like, to the body, and the body receives that matrix, that crunchy textured thing that you've had to chew up, and it isn't going to be fully chewed. It's not going to be apple sauce or apple juice when it hits your stomach. Your teeth aren't that amazing at grinding up apples, so that apple's going to interact with your body in a very different way to an apple bar that's been made with, pureed apple or, apple juice from concentrate. So it's not everything that is apple is the same. Same as with nuts. If you eat hard almonds, they deliver a different experience to the body than ground almonds, just because of their matrix. And when you're eating ultra processed food, the matrix, if you think about it, is almost always extremely soft. Whether it's bread, whether it's your packet lasagna or whatever, it's all the texture. There's nothing crunchy, nothing hard in it at all. I don't know if you've discussed this on your program. It's a bit of a sideline, but the changing shape of the human jaw over the last few decades, because we just don't have to actually struggle to eat our food anymore. Sourdough bread versus ultra processed bread is another good example of a very different texture. And what that also means is that it's much quicker to eat. You can eat, as you're eating, you can eat so fast ultra processed food that your body doesn't even have time to send you those signals to say stop. But also it's quite fun to eat because it's got that sort of, high carbs, high fat ratio. It's salty, it's sugary, and it's crunch. It has just enough crunch, but not too much. And it's like you were saying about the Oreos, it's very specifically designed to make you want to eat the whole packet rather than just one.
And some companies are even like, they're upfront about it, right? Pringles will say, you can't what is it? You can't stop until you pop.
No, you can't stop. You can't stop.
So much, something like that, whatever it is. But do you know what I mean? They're very upfront about the fact that it's highly addictive, but it still doesn't stop you going, like, having another Pringle. I think it is, as you say, it's that like crunch, and then also like the softness of the way those foods kind of melt in your mouth. It creates this whole sensory experience for people.
Yes.
It's a very good point. And I think we end up, like, I guess people get hooked from a very young age. I was very grateful when I had mine for Annabelle, my children, for Annabelle Carmel, because she taught me how to feed toddlers. Do you know what I mean? And to introduce, like, from the point that they were weaned, how to show them different foods so that they got used to the flavors of vegetables and meats and things like that. But I don't think there's really, not that I've seen, anyone that's really continued her work beyond what she did. She's the person that stood out for me. Probably still is.
Yes, I'm not sure. That's a really good point. I don't know who's doing the kind of baby food books now, but because I'm a few years down the line with my kids, we're past that stage, so I'm not sure. But you're right. I mean, it's a window of opportunity to teach children and young people about food. It's also a window of opportunity for the food companies to teach them about UPF. One thing that struck me when I was writing was someone pointed out to me that some of these, like, they're quite often organic, even the little snack bags you can get for toddlers that are, say, melty carrot puffs, let's say, that they are actually a lot like, let's say, Wotsits.
Mm-hmm.
So they're healthy because they're carrots and they're organic, and they're especially for toddlers, and they're actually might be, less unhealthy than Wotsits. I'm not saying they're the same product, but the point is they implant something in your brain that says, open the packet, take out the orange melty thing, and put it. It's quite clever. If you look at toddler food, a lot of it is quite similar to UPF products for adults, and it's almost as if that's intentional.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think what's hard is, with so many mums are so tired, and you don't have the same support locally necessarily. I know, like, my mum was nowhere near me when mine were tiny, and so you might have like a health visitor or someone saying, oh, you should go and nap when the baby naps and things like that when they're sort of 6 months plus. But if you haven't got that familial support around you, actually, I was busy pureeing foods, do you know what I mean, and putting them in the freezer and getting it ready to, like, wean them, and you're doing all these things. And I think it is really hard for the modern mum, if you like, particularly then if she's going back to work. I noticed as well, like, even in the evening, if you're not someone that's a real foodie, or as a couple you're not, like, my husband adores cooking, which is very helpful for me. And I also love cooking as well. And we're big foodies. We love flavors, so we will make that time, if you like, in the evening to make sure that every single night we're cooking something for the whole family. But it's not easy. I'm going to be honest. It isn't easy. It involves a lot more washing and clearing up, doesn't it? Even with a dishwasher, there's plenty. By the time you've added veg and things like that, there's a lot of different pots and pans or trays that need clearing up. I think that's the thing, is people are so busy and so exhausted. What would you say there? Because I think it's a problem in a way.
Well, I absolutely acknowledge that. I've got three children of my own. Both myself and my partner work. I never stop. I mean, I was thinking the other day, I was having a cup of tea and I was thinking, oh, remember how I used to actually sit down and have a cup of tea? And I never do that anymore. I always have the cup of tea while I'm doing 10 other things. So I completely understand and relate to that busyness and that, the way it's an impossible task. I think for all of us, there is also, we have to be a bit honest with ourselves. It is a bit like exercise, okay? I am the worst person in the world for saying, oh, I haven't got time to exercise. I have to make myself do it because I know it's good for me, but I can easily not find the time, if that makes sense. And I think food is something that we've become accustomed to maybe not prioritizing, and that in the same way as exercise, we do need to revisit that and think, actually, this is fundamental for our health and for our family's health. And so we have to kind of find time to do it. And I also think another problem is that we've had about 4 or 5 decades of everybody having ultra processed food in their homes. And it's made us think that we are having this amazing variety, like Monday night's curry, Tuesday night's lasagna, Wednesday night we're having a pizza, Thursday night we're having Chinese, and we have all these different things. In fact, one thing that's really interesting is that 60% of our calories come from just 3 species, rice, maize, and wheat. So we think we're having variety, but what we're actually having is those most of the same ingredients kind of dressed up and repackaged and reformed into different shapes in different sauces.
Mm.
And so I think what we can do if we are time poor is stop trying to achieve that ultra processed diet of, in inverted commas, variety by creating all these different dishes, which do take time. If you're going to make a lasagna from scratch, that takes ages. Instead of that, just simplify things. Just have a piece of meat, vegetables, and potatoes, and don't try and make some extra complicated, amazing piece of cuisine. Just keep it really simple, because that is a lot quicker to do.
Yeah, it is a lot quicker. You're absolutely right. That's what we tend to do. And I think the other thing I think as well, though, is it's quite nice, right? Is when you start embracing it, it is a time that you really do genuinely bring the children, the whole family together, and you can talk about their day and they enjoy the food. And I think that makes such a difference. They also, your kids sleep better, you sleep better when you put, as you say, that investment in. It is a little bit like exercise. One thing I want to mention as well, though, is the ultra processed food kind of cravings is, I think that when you're having too many of them, they drive nutrient insufficiency. And then when you're not got enough nutrients on board, you're also more likely to crave foods. Do you know what I mean? So, for example, like really common one in perimenopause is you've got low iron, particularly in the early stages if women are struggling with heavy bleeding, but even like menstruating women have this, like as in sort of premenopausal. And I noticed, because it's something I've struggled with many times, is that when I'm anemic, like I am a bit at the moment, I will crave naturally more sugary foods because you're looking for that energy boost, but it's not actually going to come from that. It's going to come from heme iron, right, in the form of meat, or if you're vegetarian or vegan, you need to find other sources, or even have some supplementation. But we never crave the thing that you're insufficient in. You don't go, oh my God, I just like, my energy's so low. Or most people don't say, I really just fancy a grass-fed steak. Do you know what I mean? That's like my 16-year-old son does. But the majority of people don't. And so you end up craving these foods that are not very good for you. I think that's the thing. You get in a vicious cycle. Did you find that with your research?
100%. There's even some really interesting research, which I write about in the book, into parts of the brain that are affected by an ultra-processed food diet, which then inhibit us from being able to stop when we're full and things like that. So that perpetuates the vicious circle. There's other research that ultra-processed food affects your sleep. So again, like you say, if you're tired, then you're more likely to then reach for the ultra processed food. So that's another vicious circle. Depression, again, is affected by a high ultra processed food diet in a big way, and women are in particular twice as likely than men to be depressed. So that's another thing that's quite female specific. So there's all of these vicious circles, and some of them feed each other, and they all, so you can get stuck in these kind of infinite loops. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, I did write about that, and I think it's really interesting, and I think all of us can kind of relate to those loops. But the one thing that I do say in the book is that you can start virtuous circles. I don't know if you've heard of this idea of the virtuous circle rather than the vicious circle, but just by making one change, if you're really in that difficult place, where you feel really stuck, just one small change, for example, stop drinking fizzy drinks and change, to water, tea, milk. Just make that one small swap, and you might just find that that little change is just enough to just maybe make your sleep that little bit better, or maybe make you feel that little bit less depressed, or just a small little nudge in the right direction. And then you might start feeling like, okay, well, I'm not going to have that cake bar at 11 a.m. I'm going to have a banana instead, or whatever. And you can slowly make the changes and build virtuous circles.
Mm.
But I
Yeah,
know
I
it's
love that. I
complicated.
love that. I have a similar concept of like finding your domino, right? The small thing that then kind of knocks down the others over time. As you say, bringing them in really slowly,
Yeah.
because as you start to feel better, you've got that positive feedback loop as well.
Yes,
Um, One
yeah.
of the things I saw you talk about a bit as well is in relation to women, is the female, the microbiome, and also in terms of vaginal health and things like that is making a difference. Can you speak more around that? Because I think it's really important for women.
Yeah, I mean, I found that fascinating. Basically, we all have, I don't know how much people know about the microbiome. Most people now are familiar with the gut microbiome, and that what we eat is probably having an impact on the microbes that live in our guts. The microbes that live in our guts can affect us in all these different ways. But we have other microbiomes in our body. And one microbiome, again, probably the least studied because it's belongs to women, but is the vaginal microbiome. And the vaginal microbiome, you're looking for the opposite of the gut microbiome. In the gut microbiome, you want as much diversity as possible, but the vaginal microbiome is really just one species, lactobacillus, and that's what you want to be happening there. But the thing that really interested me is that what you eat can have an impact on your vaginal microbiome, which to me didn't sort of initially make intuitive sense. But basically, in our guts, we have a sort of subsection of our microbiome called the estrobolome. And the estrobolome is the part of our microbiome that regulates estrogen. And so when we're eating lots of like plant-based fiber and not ultra-processed foods, we're serving well our gut microbiome and our estrobolome. And that then allows the production of something called glycogen, and that feeds the bacteria in our vagina and helps them to be balanced. So through what we're eating, we can impact our vaginal health, which for many women, can have all kinds of implications, whether it's UTIs or thrush, and all those other sort of vaginal and related conditions can be impacted by the health of our vaginal microbiome and
Mm.
by what we're eating. Is that an okay summary?
Yeah, it's a really good summary, really good summary. And I think that's the thing is so many women are particularly around like, I guess, late stage perimenopause and postmenopause in particular struggle with things like UTIs. And, I think it isn't talked enough. We talk about, again, hormones and they can be really, really helpful and important. But thinking about your vaginal microbiome, I think is really important. And I guess the research will just continue to come on this, right? Because even the gut microbiome, it feels like we're still in its infancy, even though we're learning more and more.
Yes, it is completely in its infancy. And, obviously, I think what we need to do, and what I hope my book does, is to say, what about women? Don't forget the female microbiome, don't forget the vaginal microbiome, because these things are all really important to women. We don't know what the ramifications of a healthy vaginal microbiome could be. I mean, that it already seems like it's reaches beyond just the obvious things like thrush towards, healthy pregnancy, lower rates of miscarriage, all kinds of implications for having that healthy bacterial colony in the vagina, and reduced rates of infection like HPV, for example. So there's lots and lots of areas that need more research. I think I use that sentence the most in the book. This is an area that needs more research.
Hmm.
But the microbiome is obviously a really up and coming area that's going to get hopefully a lot more focus.
Yeah. And there's just fertility, I guess, right? When you have a baby, if you're having a natural delivery, that's directly then affecting the baby's microbiome. Because it's always like struck me as curious as to why, if we know that is so important to try and opt for a natural delivery, why when a C-section is really the only option, as it was with my three, why they don't swab the baby. Like it seems such an easy thing. Do you know what I mean? I always find it curious. If we know this stuff, we're not
Yeah,
really applying it.
well, it's slightly fallen out of fashion, but about sort of 5 to 8 years ago, women were actually doing that quite a lot. They were seeding the microbiome themselves. And there's nothing to stop women from doing that now, although there's that sort of slightly strange power dynamic in childbirth that makes women feel like maybe they won't be allowed to do that. But some women do still do it. They get a piece of sterile gauze and they put it in their vagina prior to their cesarean, and then they take it out and they swab the baby, which shocks some people, but it's actually really quite an interesting there's quite a lot of science, like you say, around the seeding of the microbiome taking place in a vaginal birth in a way that it doesn't take place in a cesarean. But again, it's one of those things where people got a bit worried about whether it was safe, and also if it was, whether it was truly evidence-based, like was there a way that the microbiome somehow compensated if you had lots of skin to skin and you did breastfeeding and you did lots of other things that promote a healthy microbiome, maybe the actual moment of birth wasn't so important. So I think it was kind of an ongoing conversation, again, an area where we don't have all the answers. I guess another thing that you could say is, why are so many women having cesareans? That's a whole other topic, perhaps, but the cesarean rates are going up and up and up.
Mm.
I read an article the other day about how they were thinking about giving babies some sort of probiotic yogurt or something to help them with their, microbiome because of the loss of species through cesarean. And then I was thinking, wow, this is crazy. Why don't we just go back a bit and think about why are all these women having cesareans? But anyway.
Yeah, it probably needs more investigating, as you say, which is like a common thread in the book. What did you find around fertility? So looking at women who want to have conception, because I think what we see is in younger people, we're seeing fertility rates decline. And obviously people are often also postponing their families to a little bit later. What did you find there?
I think that, again, it's an area of unanswered questions, and they're not sure why fertility rates are declining. Obviously, I think one possible culprit is plastics. I think that's talked about a little bit in the book, because obviously with ultra processed food you get the introduction of plastics to the body. And I think also obesity, which is another kind of related area from our Western diet, is also a culprit in irregular cycles, and irregular cycles make it more difficult to get pregnant. And also sperm count. Funnily enough, sperm count is the one that is the most researched.
Funny that.
Yet again, here we are. There I was Googling away, and I was like, there's so many pieces of research into UPF and sperm count. Why aren't there as
Doesn't
many?
surprise me, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there are a few areas there. Yeah.
And when you're looking at like plastics, right, it's very difficult because even when you're looking at whole foods, often, unless you're going to like a farmer's market or something, they're coming in plastic. So you might go and buy a pommet of strawberries, but now they're in plastic. It's very hard to get away from that. I guess we could potentially, and I'm curious as to what you found, is see that maybe there's less plastic contamination when something is a whole food in plastic that's refrigerated as compared to when you're eating a meal that's been pre-cooked, whether that's from a supermarket or one of those kind of delivery services that deliver you foods already made. So like you were giving the example of lasagna earlier, lasagna or curry that's already done. That is then, if it's in plastic, it says microwavable safe or oven safe, but actually heating plastic is the most dangerous. Did you see kind of distinction in like how much plastic exposure there is depending on how you're accessing that food. Do you see what I mean? In what format, the temperature, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of specific research that looks at that, although it may well be out there. But you're absolutely right to say that how food is heated is a big issue. So, yes, if you have got your microwave meal in a tray and you're heating that in the microwave, then you're likely to have more plastics exposure. I know that it's not a good idea to put plastic in your dishwasher as well for the same reason, because it breaks down into microplastics when it reaches high temperatures. Um, yeah, I've lost my thread.
It does actually, and on that microwave point, the dishwasher point, sorry, is I think then what's happening is you're getting those microplastics that then is not just that piece of Tupperware or whatever, right, that has the problem now, is everything from that dishwasher load has now got microplastics on it. So you pull out a glass to have a glass of water, and there's potentially microplastics now because you put plastic in the dishwasher.
Yeah, and one of the things that shocked me is there is also microplastics in our foods. For example, there's a microplastic thing called dimethicone, which is in things like toothpaste and all kinds of cosmetic products, but it's also in some food products. Like I found it in some donuts, and it's also in crisp and dry oil. So we are actually eating it and cooking with it, as well as it actually being, something that's perhaps in our shampoo. It's in condom lubrication, for example, as well. So it seems to be everywhere.
It's a
And
bit scary.
yeah, it is really strange, and I think there are other, that there are areas of the food industry that we don't really know all about as well. I mean, there are things called processing aids, that they don't even have to put on the label. So, one of those that I write about in the book is this thing called meat glue, which is a sort of chemical where they can sort of reform meat into shapes. So it might look like a chicken breast, but actually it's made from lots of bits of shredded chicken put together together with this meat glue. And quite often that same product is used in things like sushi and things like that. So it's not just in your kind of chicken nuggets, it can be in other things that you might think of as healthy, but they don't actually have to list it on the labels. So, and I think the same is probably potentially true. I'm not saying this for sure, but that with things like the microplastics that you might find in a cooking oil, that might mean that you don't actually know that it's in your product at all. I have to say that writing that chapter about the environment and about plastics, etc., was probably the most depressed I felt when I was writing the book, in terms of, oh my gosh, we really have messed up here, and what on earth are we going to do about it? At times, when I was writing this book, I did feel quite overwhelmed by, you know, the impossibility of the task. And when you look at the plastics issue and the environmental issues around the food system, that is when I felt the most in despair, if you like. Like, what on earth can I do as a mum, even just to help my kids not be exposed to all of these chemicals? It's frightening. And I wish I could sit here and say, and then I discovered that you can do this, this, and this. I can't say that, because
Mm.
we have, as humans, built a system that is incredibly bad for human health. And we are all living in that system, even if we are not eating ultra processed food and we're trying to make all these amazingly positive choices. We are all drinking the water. We're all using, getting our organic strawberries in a plastic box, and it's everywhere. It's really, really quite difficult to see what we can do about it. I wish I
Yeah, I
had.
think the only thing that gave me kind of, I guess, a degree of encouragement is the kind of research that's now coming out that is showing that high polyphenol rich foods seem to help us detoxify plastics, and sulforaphane, which is found in broccoli and things like that. But then that just circles back to your main premise of the book, right? Is that if we can move away from ultra processed foods into whole foods, not only are we getting the food matrix, the vitamins, the minerals, everything that's in there, the antioxidants, they're also going to help us detoxify some of these things that we are unavoidably exposed to. Because how would you eat a piece of fish without being contaminated with microplastic?
Yes, exactly. I mean, the whole thing is very, very complicated, but I think we just have to try and hold on to hope, and do what we can. Like you say, the more healthy, the human body, I suppose the good thing is that the human body is very resilient and very clever at, surviving ridiculously toxic situations like smoking, for example. Some people may smoke all their lives and still, live to, 80 years old. But so the human body's pretty good at kind of like detoxifying itself, and we can help the human body to do that with what we're eating. And we can also make small changes ourselves, like we've gone out and got some glass storage instead of plastic storage, for example. We're trying to slowly transition to that because it's expensive.
Mm.
It's expensive to buy these things. And it's hard. It takes up more space in the kitchen. It's not as convenient. But all of these things are things we can all think about and make small changes. But I think we also need to see, governments and politicians and big food companies, stop prioritizing profit and start thinking about, human health, which I don't really think they're doing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a grocery store, one of the big supermarkets, and you look at how much of that store is sectioned off to crisp biscuits, chemicals for cleaning, frozen stuff. Well, frozen's not bad, right? Unless it's containing ultra processed frozen, necessarily alcohol, fizzy drinks, like the chocolate sweets. There's so much, right? And the vegetable aisle is relatively small in comparison to the rest of the store.
Yeah, but interestingly, in almost every supermarket you go into, the first bit you come into is the fruit and vegetables. And I've read that that is also intentional because it kind of makes you feel like there's something, maybe a deep need inside you, a deep kind of human need to kind of go and get healthy things for yourself. So you walk in and there it all is. And then you keep going. And like you say, the other sort of 97% of the store is basically just stuff you don't need. It's
Yeah.
just, all of it is totally surplus to requirements, and certainly none of it is food that 50 or 100 years ago people would have even known what it was.
No, but I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because they have put that first, but then as you come in, often the kind of airflow unit as you come in is pumping out smells of the bakery to make you hungry. And as you transition out of the vegetable aisle towards the ultra processed section, you pass the bakery and all the smells. Do you know what I mean? It is quite cleverly done. And if you fill your trolley too much with all of the fresh stuff, right? You've got to kind of create space for anything that is heavy, right? That you might need for your home, even if it was like glass bottles, water, for example. It's kind of like going to squash everything, isn't it? It's just weird the way it's all done.
True, I hadn't thought of that.
Do you know? You've got to like move and create space. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
but
and
at the end
also,
of the day,
sorry.
that's their job. Their job is to make money. They're a
Mm,
shop, or
mhm.
they're a food business. It's not their job, I suppose, to think about our health, or certainly that hasn't been encouraged as a priority. And maybe we need to demand that, and vote with our wallets. I think that pressure that we could put on as consumers might force them to change.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because as you were going around, right, you could even have like, I don't know, they wouldn't want to delay people, but you could even have screens of like just short videos of people making these really lovely, quick, easy meals using 100% fresh ingredients. People would buy more because they'd be like, oh, that's really good inspiration for tonight. Do you know what I mean? Or anything they gave you in your basket that was more designed around that. Some stores do, don't they? Like Waitrose always used to do like recipes and things like that. But again, that's not within everyone's budget to go to Waitrose.
No, gosh.
So it's tricky. The beauty aisle also has claimed quite a lot, I would say, increasing amounts of space, right? So personal care products, beauty, this is something you also write about because a lot of the chemicals are coming from there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, and like I said, there are some disturbing sort of overlaps in, things that are in our food that are also in our cosmetic products. I found that really quite dystopian. Things like xanthan gum, which I think a lot of people have heard of as a product that's in food. It's like a rather strange kind of bacterial byproduct that they put in quite a lot of our food. But it's also in quite a lot of cosmetic products as well. So I was thinking, this is really, I don't know, that just really struck me as quite strange.
Mm.
I think another parallel that we all need to think about is this, this consumerism that we've all fallen into the trap of. This need to have more and more and more stuff, and it reaches across, from the food aisle to the cosmetics aisle. How many pieces of cosmetics does each woman listening to this have in her house? How many mascaras, how many eyeshadows, how many lipsticks, how many shampoos, how many face creams? All of these things are all in plastic packaging, most of which won't be recycled. And it's part of our culture, this inability to stop and say, no, actually, I don't need that.
Mm.
And I'm not pointing the finger at other people here. I'm admitting it that it's been part of my life as well. And writing this book, although it's ostensibly about food, has really made me think about consumerism. And also, I see another parallel with the way we use our phones now, because it's just that same mindless, I want some more, I want some more, I want some more, and you swipe and you swipe and you swipe. And you're just consuming, throwing away, consuming, throwing away, consuming, throwing away. It's become sort of ingrained in us to do that, whether it's with cosmetics, with our social media and phone use, or with our food. We throw away so much food. We throw away so much plastic. We throw away so many unused cosmetics. So I think, as well as just sort of, the obvious practical steps of like picking up a piece of, packaged food in the supermarket, flipping it over and looking at the ingredients, that's really important that people start doing that and realizing what's in their food. But it's also important to start thinking, do I actually need this? Why am I buying this? Am I going
Mm.
to end up chucking it away?
Mm.
Because we are wasteful on a grand scale at the
Yeah,
moment.
we are. It's a very good point. It's environmental as well as for our health, right? No, which then actually feeds back into our health. It's true. I
Absolutely.
mean, it is interesting as well because when you look at like the recycling system in the UK, it's quite interesting that the food recycling is actually relatively small, which you might think, well, that's because you're not meant to be wasting food. But actually, if you're eating a lot of fresh food, you can generate quite a bit of food waste that needs recycling simply because there's so many parts of plants that you can't eat. So, for example, if you buy a whole watermelon, that is actually going to contribute the skin of a watermelon quite a lot to your food bin.
Yeah.
Similarly, we use onions loads in cooking. They generate quite a lot of excess. Do you know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
just, yeah, the whole thing is, I don't know, it's just, yeah, we've kind of got it all backwards in a way.
Yeah, and I mean the amount of plastic packaging. I mean, we're a house of
Mm.
five, three sort of
Same
teenage
here.
kids and two adults, and the amount of plastic packaging that we generate in a week is just unbelievable. I mean, I write in the book about my granddad and who died in 2000, and how his generation, they wouldn't have believed it. They wouldn't have recognized, how on earth could you have this whole, like, three or four of the black boxes just full of plastic and plastic and plastic and plastic. It's just unbelievable. And we're in a country that has recycling, whereas of course there are lots of parts of the world where the recycling systems can't reach, and everything is just going into the sea and into landfill. It's really quite horrific.
But even things, right, that used to be paper are no longer really truly paper, or packaging that looks like paper has this kind of plastic film all the way through it. It's not true paper. Even I was looking at baking parchment. That feels like it's got other stuff. It's not. It used to be paper, right?
Yeah.
It's really concerning how much it's infiltrated even things that were designed to be paper.
Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely in everything. And yeah, it's quite difficult as a consumer to work it all out, and find things that aren't. And of course, they're always more expensive. That's the thing that's
Always more expensive.
really irritating, isn't it? You think, okay, I realised I might have a problem with my baking paper or whatever it is. I'm going to go and try and source something that doesn't have that in, and it's twice the price. So it makes a
It's
very difference.
really expensive. It's like if you look at, I'm not going to say to my kids, you can never, ever, ever have a fizzy drink. But if you're going to have one, then I'll buy it occasionally in a glass bottle. How expensive is it to buy that in a glass bottle?
Yeah.
It's really expensive. Do you know what I mean? Because you don't want like aluminium cans. That's the thing I really feel for people, because actually trying to make these healthier choices that are healthy for us, healthy for our children, healthy. I'm not saying that fizzy drinks are healthy, but what I mean is healthier choices all the time that are better for the planet. They don't, even when I was a child, if you had something that was glass based, you could go and recycle. People used to get money back on the recycling of the glass and things like that. It
Mm.
was a whole different
Yes.
ethos.
Yes, you used to always take the glass bottles back, didn't you? And I mean, that
Yeah.
was back before before my childhood even, I think. But yeah, there used to be whole systems for reusing rather than recycling.
Yeah,
Sort
exactly.
of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
no longer exist. So I
And
think, yeah, we need to get back to that maybe.
even now, right, there's extra chemicals going into milk, isn't there, to stop the cows passing so much wind. There's like none of it. There's never consumer consent for what's being done. That's what I think I find objectionable.
Yes, I agree, but I do think as well that with things like milk, what I don't want is for people to get that complete sense of despair that I described having sometimes when I was writing, because I think sometimes if you feel too hopeless, then you don't do anything. And I do think that with the ultra processed food thing, there are some really, really simple changes you can make. Don't panic about things like milk or how your meat is produced. I'm not saying don't think about those things, but don't start there, and or what it's wrapped in and the plastic issue and everything. Just take a step back and go right back to basics. If anyone listening to this is wanting to make changes, just start with the basics. Start with looking at your breakfast cereals, looking at your bread, cutting out fizzy drinks. And just by doing that, you're going to be making so many positive changes, and it's going to get you thinking, and it's going to probably make you feel a little bit healthier as well. And then you can start to look at other things. And yes, you can go really granular on it all, and you can start buying everything organic, everything grass fed, everything in glass, but that's expensive, and it's not really entry level for people who are only just coming
No.
in fresh. So I would say just don't try not to panic. And if you're having an apple instead of a, go ahead, snack bar, you're doing great. That's a great thing. Don't worry about how the apple, whether it's an organic apple or not. Not yet.
Yeah, and apples and almonds, because I think that's the thing. Often people say, "Well, it doesn't really fill me up." Do you know what I mean? But if you put if you can have nuts, some nuts or something with it, right?
Mm.
That can also make it a bit more satisfying. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think we need to meet people where we're at. What would be really useful, I think, going forward is and I think that EWG have started to do this, but there isn't an app, and maybe someone can correct me on this. Maybe a podcast listener will message me on socials and tell me they found this, or maybe you or Millie. But I think for personal care products, I love using Think Dirty, and I've taught my daughter to use it, and so we'll just scan it to see, like, is there anything that really is kind of high risk contained in this? And they give a really helpful level because you've got a grading system. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
1 to 3 or 0 to 3, 0 is great when you can get products like that, are in the green, and then you've got that mid tier. So it's like, am I willing to take this risk? And then you've got your high kind of red level products. And I think that just makes it really easy for people because they don't have to know all the long names, but they can be educated very quickly in less than 30 seconds.
Yes, and there is. We use an app called Yucca,
Yucca.
YUKA, for cosmetic products as well, which sounds a bit like you'll Think Dirty, but I really like the Yucca one as well. And there's also, I don't know if it's pronounced Yucca, by the way, but it's YUKA. And then there's also Open Food Facts, which is,
Open food facts.
yeah, it's a similar thing to your Think Dirty. I think you scan the barcode of the product, and it tells you its level of processing. So it will tell you whether it's ultra processed food or not.
Amazing. We'll link to that and the other apps in the show notes. Is there anything that you would like to people to leave our listeners with, Millie, if I can get my words out, before you go? Any kind of last points? Obviously, simplifying, as you say, and not feeling overwhelmed, just taking small steps always make the biggest impact. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with?
Well, yes. I mean, I think I summed it up well in the last comment, really, that, don't feel overwhelmed, make small changes, don't give up. But also, put pressure on if you can, your local MP or your government, or your, food companies to make a change, because it's something that we can tackle as individuals, but it is also something that needs to change at a bigger level. But yes, just keep going, and don't feel overwhelmed, and also don't let people tell you that it's complicated, because it really isn't. I think most of us know what food is, and we do actually know what healthy food is as well. So I think once your eyes are opened to how you're being marketed to, and you're being sold ideas and sold solutions and sold dreams in the supermarket, and also sold dopamine hits, once you realize that, it makes it a little bit easier to sort of circumvent it and make a different choice.
Hmm.
So yeah, keep your eyes open to that, and realize that deep down inside you do actually know what a healthy plate of food looks like.
We do. And you can make it taste really, I mean, it tastes good anyway, but you can make it taste even better, right? With herbs and spices and different things.
Yeah, I have actually put some suggestions in the final chapter of the book, because I felt that, that's sometimes missing for people, is like they get all this information about how bad ultra processed food is, but then there's no actual practical advice. So there is a practical chapter at the back of the book called Seeds of Change, which tells you literally what equipment you need to buy for your kitchen, how to make, a few basic things, and how to go through your day, making different choices that aren't ultra processed.
Amazing. We will link to that. So the book is Ultra Processed Women. It's available in all bookstores, on Amazon. Is it? They can please share how
Yes,
everyone can pick it up.
you can get it anywhere, and it's also on Kindle, and it's also on audiobook read by me. And it's out on the 3rd of July. So you can pre-order it before then, but it's out on the 3rd of July.
On the 3rd of July. Amazing. And just, I think this is always a helpful answer from authors, is how did you intend the book? It's broken down really nicely into chapter sections, and obviously you've got that section at the back as well. How did you, when you were writing it, did you intend the reader to access it? Is it start at the beginning, go to the end, or select the chapter that's most relevant for you? What were you thinking when you were doing it?
Well, I mean, obviously, every single page and word and chapter is a work of complete genius. So the best is to start at the beginning, read the whole thing from cover to cover avidly, make notes, put sticky things in the margins. No, I'm joking. It is. I think at the beginning, if you don't know what ultra processed food is, there's a couple of chapters that explain what it is, and there is some confusion about that. So if you can start there if you need to, but there are other chapters that are specifically about, let's say, mental health, that you might want to turn to first, and it doesn't have to be read in order. And yeah, like I say, there's a practical chapter at the end that's got recipes and equipment ideas and that kind of thing as well. So just read it however you want to read it.
I think that's what I liked most about it. I think it's great when a book is like that, because, right, for somebody who's got something urgent, as you say, if it is a mental health issue, they may want to read the beginning, really understand the science and everything behind it, and then dive straight to mental health. And then as they're making changes, those simple changes you're speaking about, they can then start grading up to some of the other things from there, because the implementation is key, right? We don't want just shelf help. So
yeah, that's right. And I think also in the back, I've got this thing I call the pyramid of change, which, is hopefully a kind of visual aid to show people that, you can start with the small swaps, and that will make a difference. And that if you then want to progress up the pyramid towards, changing more things, then you can. And at the top, you've got the sort of utopian, absolutely amazing, organic, grass-fed, everything perfect diet, but, you can start at the bottom of that pyramid, and you are already, you're already on the right track.
You're already on the right track. Amazing. And what's new for you? I think you have another book, do you, coming out next year?
I have another book coming out next year, which I'm not particularly talking about yet, but it's also about women's health. It's kind of like a look at how women's bodies are. Quite often the stories we are told about women's bodies are kind of negative in some way, and it's a kind of reframe of that. It's kind of flipping the narrative and looking at just how amazing the female body is. I actually wrote it before, like I say, Ultra Processed Women, and so it was through writing that book and thinking about menopause in particular and my own experience that I came to write Ultra Processed Women. And then after that, I don't know. We'll see.
That's a little bit further ahead. Amazing. Yeah. Awesome. And how can people connect with you? What's like social, website, if they want to kind of enjoy more of everything you're sharing, stay up to date?
Sure. So yeah, I'm on Instagram. My main place that I like to be is Substack, because I just love writing. So I'm on Substack. My Substack is called What About Women. Perhaps you can put a link in. It's millihill.substack.com, I think it is. Yeah, my website is millihill.co.uk. And I've got other books. If you're pregnant, my book, The Positive Birth Book, is for you. If you're interested in the politics of childbirth, whether you're pregnant or not, I've written a book about the feminist issues around birth called Give Birth Like a Feminist. And if you've got a preteen daughter, I've written a book called My Period, which is all about puberty and the menstrual cycle. But again, as is my kind of thing, it's kind of looking at it in the most positive way possible and kind of trying to get the message to young girls that the female body is, really quite a cool thing.
Love it. Amazing. Huge body of work. Thank you so much, Milli, for coming on. Let us know when the next one's out as well. And I'm sure we can do a part 2 if you're up for that. It's been really lovely chatting to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really good chat.
Thank you.